Okay. Well, my name is Ana. I am the Executive Director for Trafalgar here in Tanzania. I would like to welcome everyone to the webinar. It's a great pleasure and an honor to have you all here. Today we are going to be talking about plastics and climate and the relation between the two. So how much basically plastics and the plastic pollution contributes to the climate emergency. This is one of our series of webinars that Trafalgar has been hosting. So I welcome you to join us basically every Wednesday at 3 p.m. East African time. So thank you very much for joining. I would like to start with our first presenter. Her name is Jane Patton, and she's a senior campaigner with the Center for International Environmental Law, CIEL. Since 2011, Jane has been working with communities to address inequality, mitigate harm, and increase justice. Her work focuses primarily on global policy regarding the full life cycle of plastics. Jane, it is a pleasure to have you here. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and it is a pleasure to be here with you all this morning. I am going to share my screen because I have some slides. Excellent. So Anna, can you confirm that you're seeing a first slide?
Yes, we are seeing it.
Perfect. So Anna already gave you my introduction, so I won't focus too much on that. So if you'll allow me, I'm just going to jump right in. Sorry. These are all logos with which most of us are familiar. These are oil and gas logos. Exxon, Total, Shell, Chevron, Phillips. But I don't know if you guys know, these are also plastic logos, plastic company logos, because 99% of all plastics are derived from the fossil fuels produced by these companies and many, many others. The oil and gas is extracted out of the ground, as shown in this chart. It is separated into constituent liquids and chemicals. It's cracked, it's superheated. It goes through a process of additives being added to those chemicals to make plastic into the material that we know today, the flexible, clear, universal wonder material that we know. And out of this process, we get plastics. And we've been told a story about plastics, a story of plastics that's about people, that's about safety, that's about protection, and that is about people increasingly demanding and needing plastics. But the real story is actually that the industry needs plastic to make money. Several years ago, starting in about 2016, CIEL produced a series of reports that actually demonstrated that it was the US fracking boom and the falling oil price that was actually driving the plastics demand. Too much fracked gas in the US and other places flooded the market, making oil also cheaper, and that contributed to the massive planned build out of new plastic production. And in fact, production is set to grow more than 30% by 2025, unless we do something to stop it. And we're all being told about plastics being demanded by consumers, being needed by grocery store structures, but actually there's lots of alternatives. that I think Anna and Nipe Faggio and other organizations have been talking about quite a lot. So petrochemicals have actually been the largest oil demand growth sector. Plastic makers are now seeking gas and oil to make plastic that they don't even have buyers for yet. Recent reports by other organizations have actually shown that this was an overestimation, that we are now producing more plastic than we have a market for, because these producers have been seeking to make as much money as possible off of this product. In early last year, CIEL and some of our partners put out a comprehensive plastic and climate report to show the previously hidden and unknown true costs of plastic. And what we found is that greenhouse gases are emitted at every stage of the life cycle of plastics. They're emitted at fossil fuel extraction and transport, in the production and manufacturing of plastics, in the disposal of plastic waste, and there is an ongoing environmental impact with plastics that are loose in the environment that weren't properly disposed of. Plastic is undoubtedly a massive threat to our climate and to our efforts, to keep the global temperature below 1.5 degrees. At today's level of production, plastic production, use, and waste threatens our ability to keep the Earth from cooling more than 1.5 degrees. And if that production increase happens, what we are looking at by 2050, if that 30% growth happens, is the equivalent of 615 new coal-fired power plants going online around the world. Some estimates have put that at about between 10 and 15% of our remaining carbon budget will end up being expended just by plastics. And to stop this from happening, we have to stop the expansion of new petrochemicals, of plastics as a class, but also of petrochemicals more broadly. And let's talk about incineration for a minute, because we hear increasingly that improved waste management, different fancy names for burning and extracting chemicals and fossils out of plastic is actually going to be, quote unquote, the solution to this problem. But actually, our study and many others have found huge greenhouse gas emissions from all forms of incineration, millions of tons of carbon and other greenhouse gas emissions per year. And that doesn't even include open burning that happens in countries all around the world, including the United States. It's very hard to quantify. So we're looking at a massive greenhouse gas climate impact from incineration alone. And the industry plans for those levels of incineration to go up. As I mentioned, that is the solution that they keep putting forward is, different forms of incineration. That is the waste management tech that they've been selling around the world. Even in countries that are already harmed by rising temperatures and already harmed by rising seas. We are actually seeing on the orange, the top line on this graph, that is how the industry projects that incineration will grow, and that is the growth just from incineration alone of greenhouse gas emissions and climate impacts. Now, I know this conversation is not about climate, but it's not about health, it's just about climate, but I wanted to also talk a little bit about another report that CIEL put out early last year with our partners. And this one showed the hidden costs of to human health that comes from the full plastic supply chain. And again, at every stage of the plastic life cycle, fossil fuel extraction and transport, refining and manufacturing of plastics, consumer use, eating and drinking out of plastics, sitting on plastic furniture, and also waste management, including incineration. We are ingesting and absorbing potentially toxic emissions from the plastic that is all around us. This causes various, very serious ailments in people: cancers, obesity, diabetes, behavioral problems in children, early puberty, asthma. These are serious conditions that are also currently considered epidemics around the world. And across the world, we're also seeing that populations that are more exposed to the production emissions of plastics are actually also dying at higher rates from the current pandemic. And that is happening where I live right now in the United States. And this is a very serious problem that we've really only begun to understand. And one of CIEL's most recent reports is actually focused on the current pandemic. We're actually seeing that the oil industry, which of course is also the plastics industry, is in free fall. And this was happening well before COVID, over many years. But the pandemic has accelerated the crash in the oil and gas industry. And in fact, all sectors are declining, as this graph shows, but oil and gas and chemicals and agriculture are actually shown here in red, have fallen by far the most. So let's do a quick recap of the information that we just went through. So plastics are made out of oil and gas. Those are the feedstocks for plastic. We produce annually, globally across the world, around 400 million tons of plastic every year. And it is seriously hurting our climate, and it is seriously hurting our health. We also know that about 45% of that plastic is actually used for packaging. Coca-Cola disclosed as part of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation new plastics economy agreement last year. They disclosed that they alone command about 3 million tons of plastic a year. That means that that one company is driving about 1% of the world's demand for plastic. So that is a huge impact and a huge footprint. Now, a lot of the conversation that we have about plastic is actually focused on marine litter. I'm sure that you guys have heard that conversation. It's one that we hear not just in the United States, but it is where the global policy solutions, the conversation at the United Nations level around plastics is still primarily focused on plastics as a marine litter issue. We know from recent studies that we actually only emit about 10 million tons of plastic into the ocean every year. That number is also hard to quantify, so that's a range. It's about 8 to 12 million tons a year. But even if we assumed 10 million tons and we produce 400 million tons, that means that the vast majority of our and that is a huge shortfall, especially when we look at the climate impacts and the health impacts of this material. So there's a solution that some of us have been working on for a number of years now. I mentioned the United Nations. Moving through the United Nations Environment Assembly is right now a discussion of a new treaty on plastics. Y'all have probably heard about the Montreal Protocol in the 1980s, which addressed the ozone depletion from CFCs and other refrigerants. You might have heard that just a few years ago, a new convention on mercury was agreed at Minamata. These are models that we have been using to actually drive a policy solution around a new treaty for plastics. One that is not just focused on marine litter, but one that addresses the full life cycle impacts of plastic, that addresses the actual lived experience of people who buy products, who walk into grocery stores filled with plastic, and the needs of businesses along the plastic supply chain, so that both the people's needs and the businesses' needs are being met. The image that you're looking at here is our ideal version of a treaty, what we'd like to see, which is increased monitoring and reporting of large and very small plastics in the environment. Plastic pollution prevention programs like national action plans that are actually standardized and shared across regions and across countries. Coordination between some of the existing policy spaces that touch on little pieces of the plastic supply chain but don't look at it holistically. And finally, of course, financial and technical support to make sure that there is that both the companies but the countries also are distributing resources across each new technology around zero waste and around new kinds of waste management. So this was very high level. There is more detail at our website at www.ciel.org. You can also email me directly. My email address is on this slide, and I'm happy for Anna to share it. And you can follow CIEL on Twitter to get some up-to-date information on what's moving in the plastic space. I didn't cover all of them in this presentation, but just in the last 3 months, I would say there's probably been a dozen new reports that have come out on plastics in the market, in the world. And I strongly encourage everyone to go to CIEL's website and read our reports, but also to check out the reports that have been coming from our neighbors, from our colleagues all over the world who are looking at better ways to do this and alternative materials and alternative systems. And with that, I will turn it over back to Anna.
Thank you, Jane. I think this is such an informative presentation that I think draws the connection so well between the oil industry and plastics, which I think sometimes we are not aware of. I welcome everyone to write your questions here in the chat box. We will do our best to answer all of them at the end, and if we don't answer any, then we will definitely answer after the webinar and then share by email with everyone. So thank you again, Jane. And without further delay, I would like to introduce our second speaker for today. His name is Ian Sherry. Ian was born in Kenya, educated in the UK, and has a master's degree for Cambridge. He worked for 42 years in Africa, the first 20 years as an engineer, building dams, bridges, and roads, and the next 20 as a promoter of agribusiness among small, medium, and large enterprises. An original thinker, powerful communicator, and an effective implementer with 40 years creating success for people in a wide range of technical business and social endeavors. He currently is the founder member of RMI Development Limited, delivering knowledge to energize smallholder farmers in East and Southern Africa, and a founding partner for Trafalgar Consulting, discovering opportunities in agribusiness, developing them ready for delivery to private capital. We are also going to share here a longer bio for Ian because he has a very extensive experience. So it's on your chat box right now. Without further delay, Ian, the floor is yours.
Anna, thanks very much. And thank you everybody for coming to this incredibly valuable series. Jane, thank you for stealing my thunder, because actually my whole presentation is based on amazing work that I found at CIEL, so much so that I've put on there, particularly thanks to CIEL. And what a delight it is to meet obviously somebody who's been part of this incredible initiative. So just to sort of say that at the beginning of this, I was invited by one of Anna's staff, Ruben James, who told Anna that, you know, get Ian to speak, he's quite an interesting guy. And then she told me I must speak on plastics and climate. And I had no knowledge about plastics and climate. In fact, I was so ignorant that I said to myself, there's really no connection between plastics and climate at all. So 2 weeks ago, I started doing some research and I was really shocked. And I think that just as a normal, intelligent member of society, my level of shock shocked me because I was so ignorant about this that I was shocked. And I hope that this presentation will enable you to understand some of the things.
Sorry, Ian, I think we lost you for a moment here.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but I'm in a bay on a phone connection. There's no Wi-Fi here, so please bear with me. I hope it's going to work through the thing. So yeah, here's where I was. I'm sorry to tell you that there's no joke here where there's bad news and then the good news. The bad news is that plastic is here. It's here to stay. And as Jane told us, it's going to get worse. The good news is that there's no plastic in heaven yet, but the rate we're going, There very well could be. So here's the prediction for the growth of the plastic industry. This curve, the top black line, is the total predicted going forward to 2050. It ends up with 26 billion tons.
Sorry for interrupting, but we are not seeing your screen.
You're not seeing my screen.
Now we are. Now it's coming. It's coming now.
Okay, it's telling me my internet connection is unstable. Is it coming? Have you got it here?
And we are
Anna,
not
you could put it on. It's the same one as
yes.
you have.
Let me do that. I'm going to share the screen,
maybe
and then maybe you should turn off your video.
I'll stop sharing. I'm stop sharing, and I'll turn off my video. Yes. And then then I'll be able to see you.
Give me 1 second, and I'm going to share your presentation here. Here we go. Please just let me know when to change the slide.
Just put it on there. It's the third slide.
Okay.
Okay, there we are. Do you want to maximize it or?
Yes, I'm going to do this right now. 1 second. New present. Here we go.
So the slide you're looking at is showing the trend in the growth of plastics. That's the black line at the top with total written on it. And then the trends in where that plastic's going to go. So we have 3 lines, a red one, which is where the plastic gets trashed either in landfills or ends up in our waterways. The green line, I don't know why it's green, but it's perhaps a bit of an advert for the WTE guys, is incinerated. And then the blue line at the bottom is recycled. So by 2050, there's an expectation that we'll have 26 billion tons of plastic on our planet, of which 12 billion will be trashed, 12 billion will have been incinerated, and some of it, only 8 billion, will have been recycled. This does not include another 6 billion of fibers, which are going to be in our clothes, polyester fibers, which in fact are a serious problem. If you can go to the next slide, Anna. So I worked out, what does 26 billion tons actually mean? So I looked up the density of plastic, and I found it was about one kilo per liter. And then I did some calculations, and I actually found that 26 billion tons of plastic wraps the earth in a plastic sheet 250 times in a layer 50 millimeters thick. And I was horrified that this was actually happening in front of our eyes. And our next one. Going forward, I was also shocked to see that our beloved Africa was going to be one of the major contributors to this mess as we go forward. This chart actually shows some attractive numbers for China and developing Asia. But if we look at, developed Asia, but if we look at developing Asia and developing Middle East and Africa, we see something that's really surprising. And I think these kind of graphs are driving the activities of the big oil companies who are looking for demand. Next slide, please. This is a picture of a plankton. It's a zooplankton that lives mid-ocean. And this is a picture of plastic beads or microplastics that it is actually eaten. And it appears from the researchers that these animals are eating plastics. One of the effects of this is that their fecal matter, instead of sinking, actually floats, because plastic is lighter than water. So this in itself is one of those climate impacts that nobody really understands at the moment. How much is what's going to happen to greenhouse gases as the fecal matter from zooplankton actually rises to the surface instead of falling to the bottom of the ocean. The next picture is also a really stark and horrible thing. Here's a diver swimming in plastic. And this is just, to me, got such a big shock. The next one. This is the same picture that Jane has, but I actually did a little bit of a calculation, and I related it to the number of coal plants that are in existence today. Each of these bottles, the 189, 295, 615, equate to 500 megawatt coal plants. So in 2019, the emissions from plastic are equivalent to those from 189 coal plants. Today, there are about 4,000 of such coal plants, of which China has 2,000, growing it up to the year 2050, when the equivalent emissions are from 615 coal plants. It's amazing, actually, that today is the day that Xi Jinping announced that by 2050, China would be carbon neutral. And that's a really encouraging thing for us all to hear. Next slide, please. The next slide actually shows where the emissions come from during the life cycle of the plastics. So it starts off with production, which is the manufacture of resin. That's the blue circle, or blue 2/3 of a circle. The outer circle shows you the kind of plastics that are actually being manufactured and the amount that they contribute to the greenhouse emissions or the greenhouse gases during production. Then the orange ones are during conversion, and the last ones are end of life. So you're seeing the contribution of incineration is the darker green, and of landfill is the lighter green, and the contribution of recycling to greenhouse gases as the middle green. The next one, please. This is the same thing that Jane actually already presented you, but I have given a little bit more detail. I read that the remaining carbon budget is 420 gigatons of CO2 in order to keep the temperature change below 1.5 degrees. I did my own calculations, and I found out that this additional 20 billion tons of plastic from slide number 3 will actually generate more than 60 gigatons of CO2 by 2050, which is, as I calculated it, 14% of this remaining budget. So I was actually really pleased when Jane said between 10 and 15%, and there it is. So it was a really big shock to me what's happened here. So the last slide, the second last slide. This is who's the bad guy. So the bad guys are the guys who are the captains of their countries. And these are the biggest emitters of greenhouse gases. So ExxonMobil is 2%, Iranian oil 2.3%, Gazprom 3.5%, Saudi Aramco 4%, and China a massive 14% from coal. So I asked myself, who's the bad guy in all of this? Is it Trump? Is it the prince? Is it the Ayatollah? Is it Putin? Or is it Xi Jinping? But I actually came with a different answer. Next slide, please. It's probably me. Because actually, I'm not doing anything about my usage of plastics. I think I am in the top level of consumer, something between 100 and 200 kilograms of plastics per year. And I asked myself, what have I done in the last day to reduce my consumption of plastic? And I came with a horrible answer, which was nothing. Because I just behave like everybody else does, that it's not my problem, it's somebody else's problem. And I think unless I change my attitude and you change your attitude, next slide, please, we're all going to be wrapped up in 50 millimeters thick of plastic. So thank you for listening. Thank you, Anna, for arranging this. I think it's absolutely fantastic. And please, all of you, let's try to beat this menace that's wrapping us up. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Ian. This is such a powerful and inspiring presentation. And I have to say that for someone who says that he didn't know anything about the relation between plastics and climate until a couple of weeks ago, it seems like you did a very good job on learning. So thank you so much for your presentation. And I think one of the important things that you have mentioned here is that, well, we have the industry and they are the ones, the main responsible for the amount of plastics that we have out there. But we also have the mission as people to go against this in some way, including advocating against the industry sometimes. So again, thank you very much for your presentation. We have some questions here in the chat box, and we'll keep checking all the questions, and we hope to answer all of them at the end. If we can't answer all of them at the end, we are going to answer them by mail after the webinar. So I encourage everyone to keep posting your questions here on the chat box. And now, without further delay, I would like to invite our next speaker, Rebecca Muna. Rebecca is the Executive Director of Forum CC, which is the Forum for Climate Change here in Tanzania. She's an international trade expert who recently worked as a project manager at the Faculty of Commerce and Management at the University of Dar es Salaam, and a trade analyst consultant to the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Marketing. Mrs. Rebecca has a master's degree in international trade from the University of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, an MBA from the Eastern and Southern Africa Management Institute in Tanzania, and a Bachelor of Commerce degree majoring in finance from the University of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. So without further delay, Rebecca, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anna, for the introduction, and hello to everybody. Thank you for this opportunity. Anna, thank you again for putting me the third in the row. So my work is a little bit easier. Are you hearing me, Anna?
Sorry, we are hearing you, yes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Given the first two presentations, I think I will take a little bit different direction because we were all given the same title, and my suspicion was like Jane and Ian will cover most of the linkages between plastic and climate. And interestingly, and this is a fact, and this is what I discovered, we have very few literature on climate and plastic. Even in Tanzania, actually, this information is missing. So through this assignment for this presentation, I discovered that we really need to have maybe share the research that we have, data, which is missing. And interesting, I find myself using the same report from Center for International Environment now, and this is very interesting. I also saw Ian use the same resources. And so I'm going to skip most of the slides. I'm going to concentrate to only one slide, of which is already shared. Again, I've decided to take this discussion a little bit forward and put it in local context to add into what has already been presented before I share the little slide I want to share, I want first to give a context. When we talk about climate and plastic in Africa, it's a little bit different. And mostly because of our economic growth and level that most of African countries are, particularly Tanzania. And when we are looking at how the plastics contribute to climate change, mostly we'll talk about waste management, that we have very poor systems and the capacity, low capacity in terms of waste management. But again, we'll talk about poor infrastructure that are causing floods because of plastic bags and the plastic which are thrown everywhere, blocking our sewage and drainage systems. We'll talk about low level of skills, knowledge and technologies when we talk about plastic in relation to climate change. So this is a little bit different context between Africa and the rest of the world. But again, it is also important to qualify that most of the African countries, particularly Tanzania, industrialization is on top of the agenda. And as Ian show the statistics that the use of plastic bag is on the rise. And this is the fact. And unfortunately, most of the plastic waste, for example, in Tanzania, is not quantified, is not documented. So we don't really know the extent of the problem at hand, of which we predict that it's gonna increase because of the priorities that we have in our economic settings and the growth that most of our countries are invested in. And to say so, I see Tanzania and most of African countries have very big potential in terms of contributing to this catastrophe, but at the same time have a huge potential in terms of contributing to the emission reduction, so that our economies, when they grow, we don't find ourselves locked down the similar uptake of the economy that the already developed countries have. And how are we going to do that? We're going to discuss that in my last point. I didn't have this discussion in my presentations, but I will just discuss them because most of the things I already covered. But I would like to share just one slide. Yeah, I want to share this slide from Center for International Environment Law, of which is already shown by all the speakers. So it means this is a very popular image, and I would also want to capitalize on this. And why I want to capitalize on this? It is so important now that the issue of plastic pollution, which contributes to emission, as already been pointed out, is really given its top priority because of the potential of its contribution to the greenhouse gases. And as we stand from the IPCC report, the global efforts are far below the targets which have been indicated by IPCC. And again, there's a very little hope from the climate change negotiations to really get these numbers go down. We have participated in the negotiation. We have tracked the level of commitment from various countries, of which the data from various researchers are saying that we are way below achieving this 1.5 degrees Celsius. And partly because, as Jane rightly pointed out, when we're talking about plastic, we're talking about money, we're talking about profit, we're not talking about multinational companies, we're talking about, you know, the capitalists of this globe. So it's kind of tricky. There's a lot of lobbying at national level to make sure that, you know, these guys are continue to be in the market and continue to get all these massive and lucrative profit from their business. So it's very tricky. And how can we achieve the balance between those who advocate for reaching these targets and those who are really lobbying at all levels, from the country level to the international level? Even during the UNFCCC negotiations, we find these multinational companies, they are lobbying to make sure that they remain there. And this is why the negotiations are very, very difficult. I remember in one of the discussions, I asked, we all want to end this catastrophe. We all know the impact of climate change. Why the progress is so slow? For me, it didn't really make sense, because we were all like gearing on the same direction, but at the same time, we are not making progress. So, and when you look at this, it's because it is very tricky. Climate change is associated with profitability and the economic power of this globe, of which maybe it's a high time we try to change gears and see how we can really contribute and make sure that the targets are met. So this is what I wanted to qualify. And for example, economies like Tanzania, of which industrialization is on the top agenda of its economic development, what do we do? When I look at it, I see it is very, very, very tricky. At the same time, as we all know that Tanzania has, the economic has grown a little bit to the lower level, second economic level, of which will make our government to really work hard to make sure we maintain that level of economic development. And it translated to many, many things, of which have impact on contribution to increasing of greenhouse emissions, including the plastic being at the center. So when I look at it, I see a huge potential for Tanzania and many emerging countries to be entering on the level of being the big emitters. But at the same time, I see huge potential of making sure that our economies are not really taking that path. And how can we achieve this? When I ask that question, I see we have two levels of which we really need to look at. First of all, we need to look at national level, how we can make sure that our choices in terms of industrialization development do not really contribute to all this mess, and making sure that we take some steps. Tanzania is one of the countries which have banned the use of plastic bag, of which was a major breakthrough, and we are proud that it has been realized. But the tricky part is, and this is not mostly said, what has been done is microplastics, those small ones, the black plastic bags which flies everywhere. But we have a lot of packages, which use the plastic bag, which for me, I see it's another potential threat which is there. So one of the things which can be done is proper policy options when we do these strategies in terms of developing our industrialization. And one of it is to opt for circular economy. And I see potential there if we all push and make sure that our countries prioritize circular economy, of which is going to address this problem and contributing to it. But again, it can't be achieved by itself. And for me, I see this intervention at macro level, where we have multiplier effect and major breakthrough. When we look at industrialization in relation with the technology transfer, in relation with skills development, at the same time to make sure that we push for demand side, so that even the communities, demand the recycled products and the like of all of this are going to contribute to the effort. Apart from micro level effort that are already kind of taking shape in Tanzania, we all work, CIEL, Consultancy, and many other organizations we contribute in terms of awareness, in terms of capacity building, in terms of making sure the community are starting to sort, of which will have a major contribution to the circular economy. But for me, I look at the effort as micro level efforts. We have a lot of problems in terms of technology transfer, because you all know complications when it comes to technology transfer. The negotiation at UNFCCC have not really given a breakthrough. Again, I've been introduced, I'm following trade negotiations. Even in the trade negotiations, when it comes to technology transfer is the most difficult part. When I look to all these obstacles to make sure that our emerging economies access the right technology, which means in the end, we are going to face more or less similar path, which contribute to the huge problem of plastic and increase of emission in overall. So I look at now how the developed countries are going to really contribute in this, to make sure that emerging economies are taking the right economic settings, so that we all not being locked up to similar problem. We have seen how China overtake US in terms of emission. It's all because that these efforts were not looked at that level. But again, I've read one article saying that in the Western economies, what they have done in terms of addressing the plastic problem is only imposing charges in terms of taxes and the like, which does not really entirely address the problem. So there is a need to also increase the advocacy and lobbying from that side to make sure that we achieve the total ban of the plastic bag. For emerging countries like Tanzania, which have already taken a step ahead in banning plastic bag, also need to go to other level of plastic, not only the microplastic, but also other form of plastic, and provide alternative. But that goes with demand in terms of, you know, investment, as I've pointed out, the technology transfer, to make sure that our industrialization settings are embarking on clean technologies, which will help us to address that problem. And when I look at the campaign globally, of which even here in Tanzania we have adopted of zero waste, it's something which is very much welcomed, but it has a lot of implication in terms of what needs to be done by the community themselves, what needs to be done by activists and lobbyist organizations such as ours, and what can be done by the government. But most importantly, how can we work as developing economies and developed economies to make sure that these things are addressed rightfully. Now, next year, 2021, we are going to have COP26, which was supposed to be held this year in Glasgow, UK, but it didn't happen because of COVID. So we are looking forward to really push for countries to raise their ambition and make sure that they increase their target in terms of cutting emission, of which plastic should be at the center. Article 6 of the convention under the Paris, within the Paris Agreement, modalities are not yet agreed, because, as I've said, these big nations are shying away to make really genuine, I would say genuine commitment to make sure that we are all embarking all these strategies to cut emission. So this is what I can contribute to as to what can be done. My only and important emphasis will be circular economy for emerging economies, to make sure that we are not taking the similar path as the rest of the world in terms of, of emitting the greenhouse gases. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. And thank you also for mentioning something very important, which is the lobbying that the industry makes. So it's a very important point that really complicates the fight against plastic production and plastic pollution in general. So thank you. I would like now, we have several questions here. So we'll do our best to answer as many as possible, and whatever questions we don't answer, we are going to answer later by email. I encourage everyone to keep posting your questions here on the chat box. And once again, thank you everyone for joining and making this conversation meaningful and interesting to everyone. So there is a question here that I think, Jane, maybe you'd be the right person to answer, from Presha Sogrin. Sorry, Presha, if I don't know how to pronounce your name properly. But the question is, do you support a shift from recycling to reducing consumption? With recycling, are we not promoting the use of more plastic? How economically feasible is recycling in the future, and the price of producing virgin plastic is so low?
Generally, absolutely. I do support shifts toward reusable, refillable systems so that there isn't so much single-use plastic and single-use packaging in the market. You know, we've been sold a bill of goods by the plastics industry for a number of years. They've been telling us that recycling is the solution. I didn't include that graph in this presentation, but we recently know from some research that came out almost 5 years ago now that only about 9% of plastics are being recycled in the world. So this solution that the industry, and I say that with air quotes because it's not a real solution, that they've been putting forward, after all their investment and all the time spent in it, is actually only addressing about 9% of the onslaught of plastics. And of course, those estimations were put together before China stopped importing plastic waste. And so now those estimates are actually probably quite a bit lower than we knew them to be even in 2015. So I would absolutely advocate for redesign of grocery stores, for rethinking the way we ship and deliver, for rethinking the way that food is bought and sold. And I know I'm answering that question from the privilege of my experience in the United States, but I do absolutely think this is something that communities have been doing, human communities have been doing across the world for a long time. We lived without plastic for a long time. And while our quality of life is undoubtedly better and our life expectancy is longer now, we also know that plastic is harming that quality of life and harming our life expectancy. And it's important that we actually design and invest technology dollars in new systems rather than new kinds of recycling. And the last thing I'll say in closing is we are hearing industry talk about a lot of investment in what they are calling recycling. When we think about recycling, we typically think about mechanical recycling. We think about collecting the plastics and grinding them up and melting it back down and turning it into plastics again. That is the kind of recycling that actually does have fairly low greenhouse gas emissions and can be quite efficient if the plastic going into it is standardized across type, right? There's so many types of plastic in the market. If we can get all the PET or all the plastic bottles or plastic jugs into the same stream, mechanical recycling can be quite good. But what the industry is trying to build right now is actually what they call chemical recycling, which is a very fancy term for a different kind of incineration. It's never been financially proven at scale to work in real life applications in communities. There's an organization called Gaia that has members across the African continent that has done quite a lot of very good research on what is chemical recycling and what is frankly the lie behind it. And so I would be really wary of new recycling technologies that tout themselves as being, the solution that's gonna solve everything, that's gonna bring it all home, because we just don't see that happening. And yet we see a lot of countries making a lot of investments in really unproven technology, rather than making investments in things like reusable systems, rather than making investments in figuring out how we feed people without plastic. We're just making investments and figuring out how we can keep making so much garbage. And that just feels totally backward to me.
Yes, and I think one thing for us to mention here from an African perspective is that the truth is that we have had zero waste shops for all our lives. If you go to any African village, you see zero waste shops. I spent 7 years living in African villages, and we would go to the shop and say, I would like when we actually use glass containers to measure, because if you don't have a way to actually weigh, you say, oh, I want a soda bottle of kerosene or of oil, of whatever it is. And we have been using this since ever. It's there, it's plastic free, it's sustainable. So the industry is now telling us that they are supporting the poor by getting very small packets of sachets in those villages and in those cities. But the only thing that those sachets bring is pollution, because we have been buying what we need since ever, since the road is the road. And what those sachets bring is a brand and a lot of plastic. So I think also the world has a lot to learn from the African zero waste shops. And we should in Africa be more proud of those shops, because we do hear people from other countries outside Africa very proud of their zero waste shops. We also have ours. So just to mention that here. Let me go to the next question. So how do we shift the responsibility? Sorry, not this one. So this is a question from Belinda Hall. Ian, I think that question is for you. Is there a direct correlation between poverty and quantity of plastic waste? From the graph showcasing plastic waste in 2050, Africa and developing Asia. Is this due to single-use plastic? Example, small packets of water for drinking, or single-dose shampoo, detergents, etc., or demographics, increased population, increased consumption?
I don't know, but I do know that at the moment, Europe is averaging 120 kilos per person, USA 150 kilos a person, but Africa only 15 kilos a person. If you look at the trends in the world, you just see as people get wealthier, they use more plastic. So I think Africa has a huge opportunity to actually stop that by doing the kind of things that you are promoting here, Anna. I'm not sure how to go about it, but I am convinced that it has to be through a focus on people rather than on process. I think that Africa needs to own the issue. I think a lot of the issues are coming from the West or are sort of imposed on Africans who are then supposed to align themselves with Western thinking. I think your example of the African no waste village is something that African people themselves need to treasure and build upon what they actually have. And through understanding their cultural symbiosis with the flow of nature, I think through that there can be a lot more progress actually made in us just not using these plastics. But what I learned from all this stuff is that unless we stop using them, all these other things are just fake. They're not going to do anything. Their impact of them is tiny, and it's only through us that we can reduce that. If you and I and everyone around this presentation said we're going to be using 50 kilos of plastic next year, I think that would be an amazing start. We gave ourselves some serious targets and started to live with them. We create groups of people centered around people like yourselves, organizations, where we work together for no waste. We share ideas, we share our progress, a bit like Weight Watchers. You know, we could create Waste Watchers kind of association and through that do something. But I think it has to come from ourselves. It has to come from our cultures. And otherwise we're doomed. We're going to be wrapped in 50 millimeters of plastic.
I love Waste Watchers. That's such a great idea. I really love it. For the ones who don't know, so Weight Watchers is a way for you to lose weight. So basically, you need to measure and to weigh all the food that you take.
Exactly.
So you have targets, and then you limit the amount of food that you consume. So wastewater would be the same, I imagine. But then in terms of plastic pollution, that's such a great idea.
Exactly.
There is another question here. Rebecca, I think you would be the best person to answer. So that's from Richard Mwasomola. He is asking about waste management inclusion. Until now, waste management, plastic management, looks like a professional process which only involves professionals and not the general public. But the public is only awakened during these events. So due to this concept, how can we professionals make this cultural and impact the behavior change of the public so as to ease the combat of these disturbing components in our environment?
Yeah, thank you. I think he's kind of already answered the question that he was asking, because as I've pointed out, Tanzania is one of the countries which have potential to take a different path, because we're emerging economies. It is already said that there is a strong correlation between increase in income and use of plastic bag. But where does that come from? It comes from big corporations and companies who are imposing this kind of lifestyle. I never chose to be given water in a plastic bottle. I only found in the supermarket. So one of the issues that I've pointed out, and I think I mentioned on the rush when I was given my point, is to increase demand side. And this is where your question comes from. We need to have communities that demand alternatives, that unless they're aware and they appreciate the problems of plastic bags. That's one. So it's all our responsibility to make sure that we raise that awareness and increase demand of alternative. Unless that is happening, I mean, we'll find ourselves in the same situation as how it happened to China. I've given that example. So we have to make sure that there is that consciousness within our communities, and increase that demand, and it has to be very evident. On the other way, is you are putting it, that the recycling and the like is sounding professional. For me, I think not really professional. It's depending on in that value chain. What said you want to contribute, because along the value chain of this processing and recycling, there are so many actors. We have women who are collecting these plastic bags. We have those who are like processing. We have those who are exporting. So it all depends at which stage in the value chain that you want to participate. But one of the things we have been doing as Forum CC is to increase the awareness of the opportunities that comes with climate change. Addressing climate change comes with as much as there are a lot of challenges and problems, but also there are opportunities. One of the opportunities is to make sure that youth and those who have potential, to make sure that they come with solution. Now we're all saying we need to change our ways altogether, and kind of shying away from recycling. From Jen's discussion, that it has already proven the recycling only remove 9% of the plastic. So if that's the case, it means there's a potential for innovation. There are a lot of innovation happening nowadays. So it's up to us and youth to be aware and to grab that opportunity and to innovate those alternative solutions to plastic bag. And I think this is a way to go, as our markets are not flooded that much with these plastic bags. So we have a very good entry point and a niche to capitalize for young people and those who have potential to come up with a solution and alternative. That's how I'll put it. So it's awareness. It's how we are aggressive to innovate and to take the opportunities.
Thank you, Rebecca. And I think that's definitely true. One of the things that we need to remember, especially in developing countries, is that you cannot talk about the climate emergency or pollution without mentioning employment, without thinking about people's income. So there are many environmentally friendly ways to measure these two things and put them together. And I think that's also something that we need to remember. For example, incineration competes against recycling, and recycling provides income to many more people than incineration does. And that's another reason, there are many, but that's another reason to fight incineration, to make sure that when you think about waste, we actually think about income generation, we actually think about fair livelihoods, and we think about the people that need ways to support their families. Another question that we have, oh, Ian, please go ahead. Do you have something to say?
Can I just comment on some of these things actually?
Yes.
One of the ways of engaging with this is to create a value chain through waste. At the moment, there isn't one, but it's really interesting how clever the waste to energy guys are. I told you that I had actually worked on a waste to energy project in Mauritius, and I was shocked at the way the income was supposed to be earned. It was actually through dumping fees. So the project was flagshipped as a energy project, but actually the income didn't come from energy. It came from dumping fees of $45 a ton. So if you suddenly had at your disposal, imagine Anna in Dar es Salaam, $45 per ton available as income, you could set up a whole lot of waste collection facilities among people who are impoverished. But instead, these super big companies, Covanta were the ones who were actually promoting this thing in Mauritius. They just sneak this thing in the back door, and countries end up paying 45, 55, sometimes as high as $60 a ton for dumping their waste so these guys can process it. The second big lie is that all of the stuff that's suitable for recycling actually has high calorific value. And that's what they're looking for in the incinerators. High calorific values that actually drive now the electricity generators. So they hoover up all the opportunity for recycling as well. So it's actually a really nasty industry, and it's, again, capitalism gone wild. So yeah, I just wanted to share that particular experience with you all. Thank you.
And I would also like to just say one thing. I mean, I imagine that some of the folks on this call are familiar with some of the reporting work that came out from the New York Times and the Greenpeace Unearthed reporting arm a few weeks ago about the plastics industry's attempts to manipulate the free trade agreement between the US and Kenya, which I think is, if you haven't seen that research, I would definitely suggest that you look it up. One of the things that was disclosed as part of that process is that the American Chemistry Council, which obviously represents some of the world's largest plastics producers, and their friends at Plastics Europe and Plastics South Africa and the plastics lobbying groups around the world, they know that their chemical recycling technology requires international trade of mixed plastics. They specifically know that those mixed plastics are, they talk about chip bags, about the kind of non-mechanically recyclable plastics and packaging that we see all over supermarkets that are very well rooted in the United States and Europe, and increasingly being built across Asia and across Africa. They know that their technology requires trade of mixed plastic waste. And of course, now there's severe limitations on trade of mixed plastic waste under the Basel Convention. So these folks are, as Ian is saying, they're scrambling to protect what they thought was going to be a huge cash cow for them in chemical recycling and in waste to fuel, waste to energy, which I hate calling it that because that's such a misnomer. It very rarely actually creates energy. Many of these technologies actually use more energy than they create. Exactly. And they end up being a boon for these companies. And so I just want to be clear that like they are telling our governments that they need this waste trade. They are telling our governments very clearly that they need mixed plastic waste in the market in order to drive this model. And that troubles me because we've been campaigning for a long time on like, revealing the secret of what's happening to our governments, but they've known the whole time that this is actually what these companies are trying to do. And that's why I think it's important for us to continue public education, having conversations like this, and making sure that we hold our governments accountable to exactly as Ian and Rebecca are saying, that the solutions have to be centered in people, and they have to be centered in what's best for the community and what's best for people, and not what's best for industry.
And that's a great point. And I just posted on the chat box a link to one of the newspaper articles that were written about what Jane just mentioned. And it's quite shocking, yes, especially because the oil, like basically the oil industry is targeting a country that has one of the most restrictive plastic ban laws in Africa and in the world, which basically diminishes like all the work that has been done. And I think one of the main things is that East Africa, if you think about East Africa, we have 3 countries here, which are Kenya, Rwanda, and Tanzania, that have restrictions to plastic waste and plastic usage in general. So we have the plastic bag bans here. We also have, in the case of Kenya and Tanzania, that restriction goes beyond plastic bags, and there is the intention of making that beyond as well in here in Tanzania. So I think it's extremely important for us to remember that and to pressure our governments to keep restricting the use of single-use plastic. Going to the next question here, and Jane, I think that question is for you. So from Precious Sugrin, how do we shift responsibility back to the producer rather than consumer and government? I feel the fossil fuel industry wants to blame the consumer and government to deflect blame. So as an individual, there is only so much we can do, even if we live 100% zero waste. How do we basically put the industry on the spotlight and make sure that they don't get away with what they are doing?
Sure. Almost in contrast to what Ian said earlier, I've been living in a space for more than 10 years where I'm trying to live zero waste. I feed my family. I have a 4-year-old boy, and I don't live zero waste, guys. I don't know how you live in modern society, at least in westernized societies, and live zero waste, because what Anna's talking about and others are talking about zero waste grocery stores, we don't have that in where I live. There is not a single zero waste grocery store anywhere near me. So being able to feed my family without plastic and waste is almost impossible. And reflecting on that it is so difficult, and it's getting more difficult as cities are being built around the assumption of plastics and around the logistics of a food supply chain that assumes so much plastic. As we continue to allow cities to be built around that, it's going to be harder for us to actually eliminate single-use anything, but specifically plastic in our lives. And so I don't ever advise that we focus on single-use, on individual people going zero waste. I think that's great, and I think everybody should do what they can to keep themselves healthy and safe. And I don't think plastics are part of that. But I also think it's incredibly important that we keep reminding ourselves and reminding each other that the industry created this problem. Plastics were created out of the byproduct, out of the garbage of the oil and gas industry. And they have been able to make a lot of money off of them. And they put most of the actual costs back on us in terms of health, in terms of climate, but also in terms of waste management. I mean, our taxes pay for waste management. And so as the amount of waste goes up, the cost of that management goes up. And by and large, across the world, companies are not paying for that waste. We are paying for that waste. And I think that that's totally backward for us to think about how those systems are built. So what I always encourage people to do is talk to your neighbors. If there's one thing I can ask you to do leaving this conversation and this webinar, it's to tell 3 people something you learned here today, and ask them to tell 3 people, and keep having these conversations with your neighbors, with your family. And I say this I know most of the audience of this webinar is in a country I have only had the joy of visiting once, but I would say this no matter where you are in the world. talk to your neighbors, talk to your friends and family, and say, there is a better option than this. And then move beyond talking and go to your local government and say, you know, we deserve to keep our zero waste grocery stores. And we demand that even the grocery stores that are being built are built around zero waste. They're built around safety. They're built with the community in mind. And I heard someone say that it is earlier that it is more profitable for local communities to do mechanical recycling locally. And I think that's very true. So whatever plastics do end up having to be put in the system, they need to be plastics that are locally recyclable, and that there need to be government support for people doing that recycling, making sure that there's no toxic additives in that product so that nobody gets sick from doing that work, making sure that people who do that work are respected and valued in the community because they are delivering an essential service. And I think that that's the role the government has to play. But that requires a lot of work and organizing and accountability on our part. And one of the things that encourages me is that there's been 60 people in this conversation, and there were 60 people in last week's conversation. And I give these presentations all the time, and there's always dozens of people in them, which means we're building power every time we have these conversations. And I think that that's really important. So yes, go zero waste, but also talk to your neighbors, and don't stress out if you end up buying something that has plastic packaging, because my child would never eat if I never bought plastic packaging.
Yes, I think that's extremely important. I'm going back to like the reality here in Tanzania. We are actually able to buy so many things without plastic packaging because there are so many things that we have that we only add plastic when you want to carry them. And as I said, like I spent 7 years living in rural Tanzania in the village, and we didn't used to be afraid of onions fighting tomatoes inside our baskets. You know, we would put everything together and that would be okay. And then eventually it's not okay anymore for some reason. And they keep adding plastic to that. So we do have an example to give to the world. In terms of responsibility, I think we talked a little bit here about the responsibility of the oil industry, but we also need to talk about the responsibility of the producers of packaging, the people who are actually selling products to us. In the case of Tanzania specifically, from all the research that CIEL has done in the past several years, what happens is that about 75% of the waste that we find in beaches, communities, and rivers is locally produced. So that packaging is actually locally produced, way more than imported from other countries. That means that we have very big companies inside the country that are flooding the country with plastic packaging. A lot of that plastic packaging doesn't really have a way of being dealt with here. And so that's why I also like you all to invite you all. We have a new campaign that we launched last week that is called Plastic Yako Mazingira Yetu, which means your plastic, our environment. And we are basically getting signatures and getting logos from anyone who would like to participate and to come with us to be able to hold the local producers of plastic packaging in Tanzania accountable. We already have over 30, we already have over 80 logos that have been added to the campaign. We have dozens of signatures, and the more we can get, the best is going to be for us to have a voice. Moody just pasted on the chat box the link for the logos, and please, Moody, also paste the link for individuals to sign the letter. You can read the letter on the link. And we are really hoping to be able, as I said, if 75% of the plastic waste that we find in Tanzania is locally produced, that means that we actually have, if we all join hands and if we decide to do something about it, we can actually change this reality and it can be an example to the world. So please join the campaign and spread the word about it. Let me just go to the next question because I'm talking way too much here. So Ian, there is a question here that is from you. that is kind of related to the question that I think Jane just answered, but Adam Setenda is asking, as individuals, what quick, easy steps can we take to play our part to reduce the production and disposal of plastics? And I think this question is related to the fact that you said that you were one of the main responsible people for plastic pollution in general. So as an individual, do you have, after this webinar and after everything that I have just talked about, are you going to change anything in the way that you consume plastic? And do you have any advices to other people who would like to?
Yeah, actually, I really like what Jane said, and I agree with her. It's about me, but it's also about other people. And I think that's also a very African concept, where for African people, it's us before me. I think everything in life starts with knowledge. And when we have knowledge, I think the first duty we have is to share it. Sharing knowledge that I've learned through this exercise, I will do daily. I will think about ways that I can innovate and be creative in the kind of work that Trafalgar does, in encouraging and promoting agribusiness investment, and in the work we do with RMI, with outgrowers. My own impact is always going to be very small, but the impact I can make by telling 3 and telling those to tell 3, if I do that, if I did the math, I think within 2 years, everyone in the world would have got the message. And then if we just keep on doing that, we would have got the message 20 times, and then we might do something. I think this needs to be an environment in which we live. It's not a kind of go to church on Sunday thing. It has to be every day, this is what I'm doing, this is part of our lives. It's just like brushing your teeth. It's just like wearing clean clothes. It's just like that. Every single thing. And I found out so much in here that I haven't even shared, because it's so scary. About clothes. Every time you wash your clothes, the quantity of little fibers that come off and those that end up in rivers, and it's really scary. It's really scary. This bit of knowledge needs to be in every single person. And of course, we need to start with our children, because if we're not, we need to tell our children, we need to educate them. It needs to be part of school education. It needs to be part of university. It needs to be in every shop. Shop owners, they need to know. Everybody needs to know. Do you know this plastic is dangerous? No, I didn't know that. I thought it was for hygiene. You know, shop owners think plastic means hygiene. But we're suddenly coming along and saying there's something different. So yeah, that's my answer. Just learn, and keep telling people and keep telling people and keep telling them to tell people, and then we'll do something. I hope that's a good answer.
That's a great answer. Thank you, Ian.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ian. And Rebecca, Franklin Masika is asking, the polluter pays principle has long been championed as a principle and a mechanism to force corporates to take care of the environment. Can and is the principle sufficient to protect humanity from plastics and climate change?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Anna. I saw it. I saw that question on the chat. You know, this word is very tricky. It's a survival for the fittest. And this is a fact. We can't ignore that. And I've said in my little talk that these big corporations really do lobbying. They lobby our governments, they lobby their governments, they lobby the negotiators. And somehow, somewhere, we have lost that power, because our campaign all through was polluters must pay. When you look at Kyoto Protocol, that was the case, that polluters must pay. But it's all changed with the Paris Agreement. Paris Agreement, you know, kind of, you know, provide a level field for all of us to contribute and make commitments to emission cuts. And this is the unfortunate thing. We have lost that campaign. Now we have Paris Agreement. Though there are some languages in the Paris Agreement of common but differentiated responsibility. We all have common responsibility, but it's being differentiated that, you know, there are those who have contributing less and the like. So what we have remained with within the framework of climate change negotiations is common but differentiated responsibility. And this is what African countries are banking on. But when it comes to polluters must pay, unfortunately, we have lost that game. So that's what I can say. Yeah, in as much that we would wish that polluters must pay, unfortunately, the game has been changed with the Paris Agreement. We all supposed to contribute. And by the way, Tanzania has a document of which has committed the country to contribute to the emission cut, the National Determined Contribution, NDC. It's called NDC, National Determined Contribution. So all the signatories of Paris Agreement and the parties to the convention that UNFCCC have signed this, and all of us have produced that document. So in a way, we have lost.
And I think one also things that we all need to be aware of is that the polluters must pay, or the extended producer's responsibility is also, there is a very thin line between that and greenwashing. And so many industries use that as a way of greenwashing, to say that they are contributing towards the environment when they are actually using a tiny little amount of money in relation to the amount of money that they actually make from plastic production, to just say that they are doing something. So I think it's also important for us to remember that. And with that, I would like to thank again to our amazing speakers, Jane Patton from CIEL, Ian Sherry from Trafalgar, and then Rebecca Muna from Forum CT. It was a great pleasure, and I think you can hear my baby crying on the back, so I apologize from that. I'm taking this webinar from home. I think she's crying because of the amount of plastics that she just heard that is out there in the world. So thank you everyone for joining. We are going to share the recording of this webinar through your email addresses. We are going to share the presentations as well. And we are going to answer any questions that haven't been answered already through the email addresses as well. I would like to remind everyone that NIPEFAG is doing a webinar series every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern, East African time. And next week we have a webinar on social justice and environment. I would like everyone to participate. You can register. We are also going to share the registration links on your email. And please also, if you can, sign the letter for Plastikia Mazingira Yetu, and add your logo to the campaign so that we can try to do to put some pressure on the producers of plastic packaging here in Tanzania. Thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure and an honor to have you all. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you. It's very nice. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna, for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's great, and I really think it's fantastic what you're trying to do. Thank you. Thank you for including me in this. I feel really humbled.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.